Hi, I'm a higher education CMO, and I have a confession to make. Measuring ROI is the bane of my existence. I am so excited to have this week's guest on to talk a little bit more about how we can do this super tricky thing because I don't think I'm alone. Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, the podcast designed for higher education marketers. I'm your host, Jaime Hunt, and I am so excited to have this opportunity to share insights and inspiration. With Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, I'm designing a different kind of podcasting experience. With each episode, I'll be bringing in a guest for a deep dive into the challenges and joys we all face in higher education marketing. After each episode, you can join the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag HigherEdCMO. I would love to see this become like a book club, but for a podcast. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at JaimeHuntIMC, that's JaimeHuntIMC, for more opportunities to connect. Hey everybody, I am thrilled to be here with Josh Dodson, who is the Vice President of Innovation for Vision Point Marketing. Hey Josh, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you, Jaime?
I am doing well. I am so thrilled to have you here. When I posted on Twitter looking for somebody who has expertise in measuring ROI, your name came up and I wasn't surprised because I've been familiar with you and your work for a while. So thank you so much for joining me on Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO.
It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. So Josh, tell me a little bit about your higher ed journey.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in higher ed for over 15 years now, and I've worked at all kinds of different, I guess, roles within institutions, both from actually working at a university. I've worked at 4 different universities as well as a couple different agencies. So I started at my alma mater, Lincoln Memorial University in Harrogate, Tennessee. And from there, I went into the agency side of things for a few years and then went back to Eastern Kentucky University, at which point I finished my second master's degree and started my doctoral work there. So I was actually doing marketing. I oversaw digital marketing and analytics and that sort of thing. But I also was teaching some classes, which I really enjoyed. From there, I was recruited to go to SNHU, the big online institution with the bus that most people recognize. And then from SNHU, I spent a little bit of time at Bentley University before coming to Vision Point, where I've been for about 4.5 years now. And it's been an exciting journey. I've learned a lot with it. And one additional piece that I'll just mention is for about 5 years of that, I also taught web analytics as well as kind of advanced statistical courses in analytics and measurement for higher ed through higher ed experts. And so I've had over 500 students go through those month-long courses, and I've been able to learn a lot about how institutions are using web analytics as well as some deeper business analytics. And so both personal experience as well as what I've heard and seen in the industry in my conversations.
In my confession for this episode, I talked about how measuring ROI is sort of this elusive thing that I can never quite get my hands around. And I know Zach on my staff and I have talked to you a little bit about this, but why do you think measuring ROI or having a measurement plan is important for marketers?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. And I would actually go back to the importance of being good stewards of the resources that we're given. I think that that is particularly important in service to the mission of higher education. And so the way that I think about it, at least, is that the better that we're able to use those resources, the more lives we can impact. And if we're able to get more people who are just thinking about going to school, if we could turn them into actual students and get them to enroll in classes, that's a win in my perspective. And marketing actually plays a really important role in that. And I think that very often there's a disconnect between marketing and admissions. We each kind of track and measure our own metrics, but in reality, we're able to connect those metrics, if you will. We're able to see all the way through and see marketing's impact directly on that student journey. So I think it's really exciting to dig into analytics and measurement specifically so that way we can really impact more lives and ideally improve our society overall, because God knows it needs to be improved.
That is such an interesting way to look at it, and not something I've thought about before. I really love that insight that we're not just talking about stewardship, but just even beyond that, making the world a better place. I love that. What misconceptions do you think are out there about measuring ROI?
Yeah, there are definitely some big misconceptions around, what it is that we can measure, what we can't measure. I think sometimes people will run into a roadblock in trying to implement some type of measurement system, and they'll be told, no, I can't add this tracking code to this piece, or maybe there are some issues with doing that. And what I find more often than not is that it really is possible to do the measurement and to implement the tracking mechanisms and all of those things. It just requires a good amount of organization on behalf of those who are doing the marketing efforts, and also a good relationship between departments. And very often, the marketing team has to rely on the IT team to add tracking codes, perhaps even other teams, if you're adding some tracking elements, for example, to the student information system, like the application, for example. And, that requires usually working with another team. And so that's something that a lot of people, I think, don't anticipate, that it really does require a fair bit of interpersonal skills. And the more that you're able to be comfortable, working cross departments, the more successful you'll be. And you start to realize that whatever roadblocks you might have thought were there really aren't there. They're more often than not self-imposed, because with web you can do so many things. With digital marketing, it's really just a matter of getting the right people together to make it happen. And so that's probably the biggest area where I would say is there's some misconceptions in terms of what you can and can't do. And I tend to have the philosophy it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. And so going and testing stuff, putting it out there, trying it out, but if you mess something up, be very quick to apologize, so that you can maintain those good relationships across departments and so forth.
I think that sometimes that ask forgiveness instead of permission is the only way we move ahead in a lot of cases. Yeah, at my last institution, it was a big fight to get a pixel added to a footer. And I'm like, everybody in the world is doing this. There has to be a way to do this. When I asked about this on Twitter a few weeks ago, one person shared that they thought that measurement is unnecessary. Just go with your gut and do what your gut tells you. And if it works, it works. What do you think about that? Do you think that that's true?
I think that for certain people that have been doing marketing for a long time, there are, some kind of gut reactions that they can certainly rely on. And but I think that those individuals are still relying on their experience and the things that they've learned in the past. And I will also say that there are certain institutions, the Ivies of the world in particular, that might not have the same goals as the average institution in America. They're not just trying to necessarily get more students. It's about shaping the class. It's about getting the right types of students. Measurement's still very helpful in those instances. but they're not lacking in applications. And so, at an institution like a Harvard, for example, I'm just going to pick on them, because I know some folks there. They're doing fine in terms of applications, and so the types of insights that you can use from marketing analytics to be able to make better choices to get more applications, that type of measurement isn't as important to them, probably. It isn't maybe something that they rely on quite as much to maintain, their bottom line, to maintain, just make sure that their school is able to stay open. And I think that that's certainly a perspective that I respect, and it's a nice situation to be in. But frankly, the vast majority, the remaining 3,000 plus institutions in America, that do rely on, students to come to the institution, and, they need to keep those students there. They need to attract those right students. A measurement mechanism of some kind and a plan, strategy is really essential to being able to kind of parse out which marketing channels and which elements, even sometimes which messages resonate better with the right audience. So I think that that's a fair comment, especially as we're drawing on, years and years of experience in some cases, or if we're at an institution that you're not frankly facing the same problems that other institutions are. Measurement might not be as important for those people. And I can definitely respect that. But I think that, for the vast majority of higher education institutions, it really is, I would argue, not only important, it's essential to staying open in many cases, because as we're going into this, even deeper demographic cliff over the next few years, the pool is only shrinking of which students you can attract, especially on the traditional undergrad side of things. And so it's going to be more and more important to make sure that, the effectiveness of every single thing you're doing is tracked, so that way you can know, yes, I need to do more of this, or no, I need to stop doing this other thing. So yeah, I think that's a fair comment, but it's within certain contexts.
Hey all, I hope you're enjoying this episode of Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO. I want to take just a quick moment to thank my friends at Nectar who made this new Enrollify podcast possible. Nectar brings affordable communications infrastructure to college campuses. It's like Slack, but for the higher ed student experience. Nectar integrates seamlessly with all major LMSs, making it easy for instructors and administrators to build emergent learning communities in all of their classes and groups without the extra work. Their focus is on boosting student engagement and reducing instructor stress by building a learning community in every classroom. By leveraging familiar technology like instant messaging channels, Nectar prepares students for the remote yet collaborative work environment of the future. You can learn more about their platform by heading on over to Nectar. That's nectir.io, and be sure to tell the team that Jaime sent you their way. It's funny you mentioned Harvard, because I just saw today that their admit rate for this coming fall is under 4% now. And I don't think they're struggling for applications, no. To your point. If a CMO has never had a measurement plan in place, where should they start with that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I would actually, I would argue that a really good place to start, before anything else, is to either read or at least familiarize yourself with the institution's strategic plan. The reason for that is because, if there's a strategic plan that they really do take seriously and that they're following, it should be outlined what those priorities are for the institution, and that will inform what you're measuring and how you're measuring it. So, as an example, if the goal is to grow student enrollment, even within particular segments, maybe first time students, first generation students, or any number of segments of students, military, so on. Understanding what those priorities are allows you to work backwards and kind of think about your what I refer to as macro level goals, those kind of institutional goals that really the president cares about, and therefore kind of other people on the cabinet tend to care about. And so understanding those macro level goals is the most important first step. Most schools tend to share those. That tends to be enrollments, that tends to be donations, advancement, kind of giving, those sorts of fundraising efforts, as well as alumni engagement. There might be something related to sports participation, or kind of getting people to come to certain events. Like, those are all different types of higher level goals that an institution might have, that they tend to be shared across most institutions. And that's why our industry is kind of nice, because we do share a lot of similar goals, and therefore we're able to talk shop and compare notes, which is something that not every industry does. That's one thing I love about higher ed. And so, when that's the case, trying to bring it down to the specific measurable pieces, becomes a lot easier. And so if you're trying to recruit students, and especially, let's say, traditional undergrad students, you're trying to hit a certain number. Well, you start to ask, well, what leads to that number? What are the steps? And of course, applications, and then inquiries, and then before inquiries, even visits to the website. Before that, even clicks on an ad, or maybe a Google search. You start to see that there are very specific things that roll up to those macro level goals, that when you start to see how they relate to one another, it becomes much easier to make better decisions about how you're approaching that measurement strategy.
I love that. I think that connecting to our strategic plan is something that we need to be conscious of in all of our work. And I think it's something that it can be really easy to just focus on what's in front of you and less on what the long-term vision is. And sometimes it's enrollment numbers, to your point. Sometimes it's NTR. So it's more about getting more students who can pay full freight, or that kind of thing. So that I love that idea of rolling it up into the strategic plan. One of the things I think we face in higher ed, and I'm sure other industries too, but is being able to track ROI and attach it to specific tactics, because often the conversion isn't linear. Like it's a multi-year process to choose what college you're going to attend. How would you suggest approaching that challenge?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are a few different things that I would definitely recommend having in place. The first of which is going to be your standard web analytics platform, usually Google Analytics. And the nice thing about that is, by default, even just having that without connecting it to anything else, you're able to start seeing, traffic sources, where people are coming from. You're able to start seeing even multi-channel funnel attribution. Now, usually with Google Analytics and those types of tools, that a conversion is most often either a button click, let's say, to an application, or the completion of an inquiry form. Those tend to be the standard goal conversions, and those are important to track. If you're able to track all the way through to completed application, that's even better. But certain systems do make it a little bit more challenging. Not impossible, but challenging. And so once you have that foundation in place, you have the system, you can start to take some more deliberate approaches in how you're sending out your messaging and your advertising. So let's say you have some Facebook ads. You can use what we call UTM parameters. And so that's when you look at the long web address, the UTM underscore campaign equals UTM underscore medium equals all of those, there are 5 of them in total, but you start to organize your campaign around those parameters using consistent naming conventions, like if you're going to use, CPC for Google and you're also running Bing, use the same thing. Don't change it to PPC. Those types of small things actually can make a big difference over time. So I would start making sure that you're using consistent naming conventions, and then employ a very strict policy that everything that comes out of marketing, and ideally out of marketing and admissions, anything that's sort of leading to that goal, is tracked. And so that includes emails. That includes the email systems and anything that might send people back to the website or encourage people to interact in some way should have those UTM parameters. Now, they don't have to be ultra specific for every single one. You can keep it kind of generic, and there are 3 main parameters to use. That's campaign, medium, and source. And so that's a nice way to do it. But if you want to be a little bit more sophisticated in your approach, I would also recommend using the content parameter. And the reason for that is because you can start to differentiate your messaging a little bit more. And let's say you're running one ad, that's focused on active duty military audience, and then you're running another ad that's focused on veterans. Well, you can use that content parameter to differentiate between the two. And then afterwards, after it's been running for a while, you can not only look and see what the differences are, but if you want to make some really strong decisions on what's going to work best going forward, you can even apply some statistical approaches like a chi-square analysis. That's something that we do quite a bit at Vision Point. Is we'll run multiple campaign variations, apply a chi-square analysis to see, is there a statistical difference between these 2 different messages? Sometimes there is, and that's great. Sometimes there's not, and that's fine too. We learn from every bit of information that we bring in, but making sure that you've made those decisions on kind of how you're going to approach the tracking and those naming conventions and things like that. Made those decisions, and then everyone is on board and implementing those. And that's something that does require a little policing. If it's not been done before, it's giving some leeway for those individuals to get used to, for a period of time at least. And then it becomes second nature over time. It's something that, frankly, my team doesn't even really think about, because it's just an automatic thing that they're gonna add to all of these different ad types. And so kind of getting those pieces in place, that foundation, makes it much easier. And then tracking it, kind of connecting it to kind of, I would say, the down funnel pieces, which would be the application, and even more importantly, enrollments, deposits and enrollments. There are mechanisms to do that. We actually have a tool that we call Enrollment Drive, and it's built for this exact reason, to do this exact thing, to connect it all the way through. And it relies on kind of a shared ID between systems, making sure that the web analytics system and your CRM or your student information system has a shared ID, so that you can actually see all the way through that process. That it definitely takes some setup and some work. Not to push Enrollment Drive too hard, but we're happy to talk with and even just kind of show you how we do things at Vision Point. And so there's some easier ways to do it, and then there's some more challenging ways to do it. But I will say that there are quite a few institutions that have this set up even today. SNHU, we had it set up there at Bentley, at kind of some other institutions that we've worked with. We've been able to set these things up, and while it's taken some work, being able to see this specific marketing tactic drove a student, to the website. They left. This other tactic brought them back, maybe remarketing or organic or something like that. They're back to the website, and then what action are they taking? They're completing an inquiry form. Maybe they're leaving, then an email brings them back again to actually do the application. And then so you start to see the full process of that full downstream impact, and start to see, okay, these are the efforts that more often than not lead to an enrolled student. Because one of the key limitations that most marketing measurement individuals kind of face is, like, you're exactly right, you can't see that full view, but it's possible, and it's much easier than folks realize, because when you can see that, you can actually find sometimes. I'm remembering when I was at Bentley, it looked like Facebook was a much more effective marketing platform than Google Ads were in terms of getting inquiries. So we were getting a lot more inquiries from Facebook. But when you could actually measure that all the way down to cost per enrolled student by marketing channel, it was the opposite. Facebook wasn't actually bringing in a lot of enrolled students. What we were seeing was that there were a lot more enrolled students coming from Google search. And so if we had made the decision based on only earlier data that we had, we would have made the wrong decision, and that's not to say that, in either case you need to get rid of a channel, but rather how you reallocate those resources and maybe shift some money from one channel to another can be very different depending on how deep you can see into that funnel. But understanding what that cost per enrolled student is, that's super important.
That is fascinating. Like that you may have acted on information that was inaccurate if you didn't have that whole path. How did you get all this? How did you get all this knowledge? Like, how do you know all this?
Well, I've made a lot of mistakes over the years. And so as a result, I've been able to learn from them. And so reading a lot, meeting people, I'm a huge proponent of experimentation. I think that the more you can experiment and try out different things in a measurable way that says, this works better than this, I'm all for it. And so, yeah, a lot of trial and error, to be honest.
Well, and I think there's this line of work seems like it would be very appealing to somebody who does want to explore and innovate and try things. And you mentioned earlier that you love that this industry is one where people share their insights and share the ability to kind of offer input on what other people are doing. And I love that about higher ed. I mean, it's remarkable how generous people are in higher ed.
It really is. Yeah. People share so much. Sometimes you learn more at a conference just by having conversations than even going to the sessions sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I know somebody at every school, which is not true, of course, but I feel like I could track down somebody at just about every school and make some sort of connection and ask for help on something and get help. I know I'm totally tangenting here, but a couple of months ago, I needed to reach out to a colleague at University of Washington, and I left a voicemail, and he called back in 10 minutes and cleared some time on his calendar to talk to me the next day about a problem that I was having. And I'd never met the person before in my life. And I don't imagine that, Target CMO is calling Best Buy's CMO and getting that same level of, yeah, I'll tell you everything I did. I'll even package up the files for you.
Right. That's awesome. I love that. You're exactly right. It's that care. And I could be wrong, but I think a lot of that goes back to the fact that we work at mission-based organizations. And that's not obviously the case of every place, but the fact that so many of us work in higher ed because we care about people, having opportunities and being able to help other people, go to school and change their lives. I think that at least for a lot of folks I know is a big inspiration, and I hope it continues to be.
I hope so too. I think it ties back to your original point where you're saying that we're in this to make the world a better place, not just our individual campuses, but the world. So back on track. Sorry, that's a Jaime tangent. What KPIs do you think we should be tracking?
Sure. That's an interesting question because it depends on it depends on the person and the organization. And so let's say that you have someone running, Facebook campaigns. The types of KPIs that they should be tracking are going to be very similar to the types of KPIs that the CMO should be looking at, that that you would want to look at on a regular basis. But there's probably a level of detail that you might not need that they would. And so some of those KPIs, that might be that a digital marketing strategist, for example, might want to look at, are going to be those cost per click numbers, some of the cost per action, or sometimes cost per inquiry we'll refer to it. All of that's really important, and the cost per inquiry might be something that you want on the CMO dashboard, but perhaps not cost per click. That might not be as important or as relevant, because those tend to be things that you're using to make micro changes in the moment as you're kind of adjusting campaigns. So, but I think they're all important. Clicks, view through, conversions, all of those things can be useful kind of at a practitioner level. And when you're reporting it up, I think the way that I would describe it is you need to get narrower in your focus, and they need to be more closely connected to those original goals, those macro level goals. And so at the highest level, the type of information that the CMO might expect on a dashboard, cost per enrolled student by marketing channel, in my view, is probably the most important one in terms of being able to make marketing decisions. You can look at the average. What's our average cost per enrolled student across all marketing channels? And then you can look at the individual channels, and that way you have a baseline to compare against, and you're able to then tweak and kind of say, well, this one I'm several $1,000s over for to enroll a student as compared to this other channel. And so that doesn't mean necessarily that you'll get rid of the more expensive channel, but it might mean that you might change the way you're using it and make some shifts in budget or messaging or approach. Those tend to really point to the type of strategic changes that really needs to happen, or at least needs the involvement of the CMO. So cost per enrolled student is a big one. I would even say cost per inquiry as a comparison point is a really helpful one. If you're going to be helping with advancement campaigns, that's another aspect of it. And if the goal is to get donations, for example, you might track it to the donation form, and some of those systems actually can work like e-commerce systems and push some of that data back into the web analytics tool, so that you can actually see directly within that tool what the different costs for the marketing channels are to get people to donate. So those are a few example metrics. I think what all of this really comes down to, though, and one of the most important metrics that isn't necessarily something you'll report on, but it's important to understand, is what is the lifetime value of a student at an institution. And so, you can actually measure that in a number of different ways. Kind of the simplest way, I would say, that the easiest is going to say, how much money is this student bringing in, and then subtracting all of the costs from all the basic costs of the institution. You can multiply that out 4 years or whatever the typical graduation number of years is, and you can start to actually see the lifetime. And having a really good idea of that number as sort of your back of the head, it's like, what do I need to beat? I can spend up to X number of dollars to bring in a new student and break even, right? And you always want to beat that. You never want to settle for that, but you can at least have an idea of like what's your break even point, and that allows you to truly measure ROI in a more significant way. Because if you're only ever at your break even point, there are some levers that you can start pulling to actually make the institution more and more profitable over time. So understanding that lifetime value, and then measuring cost per enrolled student by marketing channel, those are, I would say, two of the most important. Understanding things like clicks and users to the website, those can be useful, but those are more of what we refer to as vanity metrics. And the individual who may have said, measurement's not important, might have been thinking of those kinds of metrics because they're not as important. They're not irrelevant, but they're not as important as some of the metrics that more directly lead to the institutional goals. So I know I'm really getting in the weeds with some of these responses, but I want to kind of draw it out as clear as I can, because I think that there's so much value, and frankly, really, most institutions are not even thinking about this. That's why SNHU and some of those other schools that are as successful as they are, that's why they're as successful as they are. Not the only reason, but that's a contributing factor, because they're thinking about those things, they're asking those questions, and then they know what their limits are. So all of those pieces play together and tend to be really important.
Hey y'all, Zach here from Enrollify. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. Our shows feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Mickey Baines, Jeremy Tiers, Jamie Hunt, Corynn Myers, Jaime Gleason, and many, many more. You can learn more about the Enrollify Podcast Network at podcasts.enrollify.org. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea. Find yours at podcasts.enrollify.org.
No, the point of this podcast is to do a deep dive. And so this is great conversation. I just wish I could download your brain into my brain because you are so knowledgeable on this topic. And this is definitely something I think a lot of schools struggle with. To your point, not a lot of schools are doing it. And I think there's a lack of knowledge or understanding of how to do it. And it's not necessarily something that you're taught in when you're in school. Like, how do you measure? And when I was in graduate school, they were still talking about MySpace. So it's not always super relevant by the time you get out into the real world too, depending on how long ago your education was. Are there any secondary markers of ROI that marketers should look out for?
Absolutely. A lot of what I've focused on, it really is kind of focused on like the enrollment drivers. A lot of what we focus on are those enrollment drivers for good reason. But not everything is about just driving new students. You want to maintain the current students you have. You want to build community. You want people to feel connected. And so with those, I actually think that there's a great deal of value in some of the social media metrics. Things like those, how many conversations are being shared? How many conversations are you seeing, prospective students really engaging and having that back and forth, looking at some of those things. I think that those are maybe secondary to some of the, more direct, we got to get a student here. But they're just as important in a different way. And because once you've got all of the other pieces in place, you've made all of this effort and, you've put in all of this work to get a student, you want to keep them. You want to make sure that you're doing the right things to keep them, and looking for some of those, looking at those social media metrics and kind of seeing those engagement, scores and things like that. That can be really important. In fact, there are some tools that Enrollment Drive that I mentioned at Vision Point. We have some to measure those types of engagements as well, kind of defined across a number of different things, like how many times they're coming to the website, how frequently, and looking at some of those engagement metrics, because it's really, it's in part about getting people to do a specific thing, but it's also about getting them to want to engage, to want to be there, to and then activating the people on your team who can then respond well to that. I actually tip my hat to Liz Gross and the Campus Sonar team and some of the stuff that she's doing and measuring those social media metrics that are so important to that conversation. That's a little bit different than that enrollment focus. So we might call them secondary because they might not be as directly connected, but they're, I would say, still very much important. And even some of those metrics, like just number of visits to the website or number of visits to particular pages on the website. I know of some institutions. I know of one even very recently that the website went offline for a while when they made it pretty far in March Madness, and that's some big surprises there when you're a kind of an institution that not a lot of people were familiar with, and then suddenly you're on the national stage. You Google it and you go there, and so basic traffic metrics tend to be really important when you're trying to keep your website up.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would definitely include like all of those types of metrics as perhaps secondary to maybe your primary goal, but also very, very important for different reasons.
Well, and I think a lot of universities are trying to influence their peers for the U.S. News and World Report rankings. And so there's some metrics there that I think you have to do some thinking about. How will you measure those campaigns and the outcomes of those campaigns? And when I think about trying to grow a research enterprise, sometimes that is something that you may want to have campaigns or communications around to try to improve the perception of your institution for those granting agencies, and getting potential partners from a research perspective to look at your institution and your faculty and see their expertise. So there are definitely audiences and revenue generating things that aren't always tied to students too. But it's the same basic principles for tracking that. The ROI on those things.
Exactly. And, I think one of the things that at Vision Point, one of our goals for a number of years has been to create raving fans. What does that mean, right? It's like, how can you measure raving fans? And like, there are different ways, but ultimately, that's a little bit of maybe a softer metric, right? That you're using, you're getting an idea about like, maybe some things, but how often people would recommend you, things like that. But ultimately, your real purpose is to generate excitement and kind of interest and intrigue around like this is the agency we want to work with, and like they're doing cool stuff, and we can work with them and do cool stuff for that institution too, and just kind of thinking about that, like raving fans, that's been one of our goals, I think those, maybe, as I said, like softer metrics are still equally as important in different ways, and definitely should not be ignored by any means.
Yeah, and some of those metrics can drive enrollment as well. And we all know that if you are an unknown school that appears in the Final Four, that your applications are going up next year.
Almost certainly.
That's guaranteed. It's too bad we can't somehow market to make our football teams or basketball teams perform even better than they do naturally. But unfortunately, that's not something I've figured out yet. If somebody listening has figured out that, please let me know. Do you have any other thoughts on measurement, ROI, analytics, any of that?
I would just say the most important thing that I can share with anyone at an institution that hasn't been doing this, for a long time, is that's okay. And you have to start where you are. It's okay if you are just setting all of this up from scratch for the first time, because I'll be honest, most are in that similar situation. So most institutions are. There are only a small handful, and you can probably name them off the top of your head, that have had those types of infrastructures in place to be able to support it. And so since most schools are in that same boat, I would encourage everyone, if you find yourself in that same boat, start where you are, but just start. It's so important to just start and put the foundations in place. Maybe you can't, connect your system all the way to your CRM or your student information system yet. That's okay. Maybe that's a next year project or down the road at some point. But you can at least put, Google Analytics on your site and start tracking how many inquiry form submissions you get, those sorts of things. But starting small, there's an old verse, do not despise small beginnings. And that's, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
I love that. I might have to add that to my Twitter bio. That's fantastic. Well, Josh, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm hoping that everybody listening has had some good takeaways. If nothing else, forward it to somebody on your team to listen to. Josh, where can people find you online?
Sure. So probably the best places to find me will be on LinkedIn, Joshua Dodson. You can just look me up. And also on Twitter at Joshua D. Dodson. Those are two of the best places. I'll also mention that Twitter for Vision Point at VIS Point. You can sometimes see me there too. So those are probably the best places, and always welcome conversation, questions, and really I love to help institutions kind of figure out how they can make this work for them. So please, if there's any questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, thank you. Hopefully this podcast is listened by millions and you will just be bombarded with people who are looking for help. Thank you so much, Josh. This has just been fantastic. And for the listeners, don't forget to use the hashtag HigherEdCMO on Twitter to engage in some conversation around this topic after this episode airs. I hope to see you there, and you can always find me on Twitter at Jaime Hunt IMC, JAIME HUNT IMC. My mom and dad named me after the Bionic Woman, so I got that nice weird spelling, and I hope to see you there. Thank you so much.
Hey y'all, Zach here from Enrollify. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO with Jaime Hunt. If you liked this episode, do us a huge favor and hit that follow and subscribe button below. Furthermore, if you've got just 2 minutes to spare, we would greatly appreciate you leaving a rating and a review of this show on Apple Podcasts. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. But Enrollify is far more than just a podcast network. Enrollify is where higher ed comes to learn new marketing skills, discover new products and services, and find their next job. We're a growing learning community of 4,000 members, and we'd love to welcome you into the fold. You can access our free blog articles, newsletters, e-courses, and more, or purchase our master course on how to market a university with Terry Flannery at enrollify.org. We look forward to meeting you soon and welcoming you into the community. Again, you can subscribe for free at enrollify.org.